Okay, so welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're diving straight into one of those things in modern history that just grabs you. The assassination of President Kennedy.
Yeah, the mystery, the intrigue, it never goes away, does it?
Right. Everybody kind of thinks they know the story, but do they really? That's what we're here to find out today. We want to go past the headlines and look at some of the actual documents that were created at the time. The things that keep those discussions going.
The assassination on November 22nd, 1963, it generated so much documentation, just mountains of it. And today we're gonna dig into a specific group of these records and see what they can tell us. Like, are there any hidden secrets?
We're going to try to find out. Right, so we've got this collection of declassified documents. They're all from government sources. And they each offer a different piece of the puzzle, right? Like a snapshot, a little window into that time.
Exactly.
And our mission today, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to go through each document. We're going to try to understand what it says. And then we're going to explore its connection, whether it's direct or indirect, to the assassination of President Kennedy.
Oh, right.
So should we get started?
Yeah, let's jump in.
All right. So the first document is titled 104-10072-10289.pdf. It's a routing and record sheet, and it's got this dispatch attached to it. What do you think?
Well, so this thing's got a routing slip on. It's dated April 9th, 1964. Says a copy was, detached, and they microfilmed it. But the more important part here, I think, is the dispatch itself. It's from the chief of station, JMWAVE, March 19th, 1964.
JMWAVE. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so JMWAVE was this big major CIA station. It was in Miami, Florida, and it was super focused on operations in Cuba, given the whole Cold War thing going on.
Right. So much tension with Cuba in those days.
Oh, tons.
Okay, so this dispatch, it talks about somebody they're calling M. Carbon 1. Now, the document, it gives a little description of this person. Sounds an awful lot like a journalist named Carlos Bringuier.
Yeah, rings a bell.
Now, Bringuier, his name might be familiar to folks who've looked into the events leading up to the assassination. Why is that?
The interesting thing here is that Carlos Bringuier, he was involved in this public argument, almost a fight with Lee Harvey Oswald. It was down in New Orleans in August 1963. That's only a few months before Kennedy was shot. Oswald was handing out leaflets, these Fair Play for Cuba Committee leaflets. They were, pro-Castro. And Bringuier, well, he was a super vocal anti-Castro activist. That's like oil and water is there.
Yeah, a real clash of ideologies. So this document tells us that the CIA knew about Bringuier before the assassination. And it sounds like they were keeping tabs on him. But what does the actual dispatch say about, their interest in this guy?
Well, from the dispatch, it looks like JMWAVE, they were a little, hesitant about getting too close to AM Carbon 1. They had some security worries, because he had these connections in the past to the DRE. That's the Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil, another one of those anti-Castro groups, a student group, actually. The CIA, they worked with them a lot.
I see.
But despite those concerns, the CIA, they were clearly interested in Bringuier and this idea that he wanted to work with the media.
Yeah, so that's where it starts to get really fascinating. The dispatch, it mentions how JMWAVE might be able to use Bringuier to, and I'm quoting here, surface selected propaganda items. And they even list some of his contacts, people he knows. So what do you think? What's the connection to the assassination?
It's like the CIA, they're watching this guy, Carlo Bringuier, and he had this run-in with Lee Harvey Oswald. And it's just months before the assassination. It makes you wonder, right? What did the CIA know about the people Oswald was hanging around with before November 1963?
Right. Were they just monitoring Oswald's circle, or were they more involved? It's definitely food for thought. Okay, so let's move on to the next document. This one is 104-10072-10315.pdf. And it's another dispatch.
Okay, let's see. This one's dated April 17th, 1968. It's from RODIGAST in Paris, and they're talking about somebody called Identity A. But later on, in attachment, it tells us who that is. Carleen Hatcher Polite.
So 1968, that's a few years after the assassination. What's this document about?
It's all about Carleen Hatcher-Polite and how she's getting more and more involved with SNCC. That's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They were doing stuff in Paris. The Dispatch, it talks about her background, where she came from, what she'd done. It even mentions her money situation, like how much money she has. And they call her a potential operational asset.
Operational asset. That sounds like spy talk.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? It seems like the CIA, they were sizing her up, maybe thinking about recruiting her for some intelligence work.
Interesting. But what about the connection to JFK? I mean, this seems pretty far removed from Dallas, 1963.
Yeah, you're right. And there's no direct link here to what happened to Kennedy, but it does show us how the CIA was operating back then. It gives us this broader view of their activities. They weren't just focused on Cuba. They were keeping an eye on folks involved in different movements all over the world, social movements, political movements. It was all part of their intelligence gathering, even years after Kennedy was killed.
It's kind of chilling when you think about it, like how much they were watching.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next document, 104-10073-10061.pdf. It's, well, kind of disappointing, actually.
Oh, what is it?
Well, it's got the same title as the last one, but it's completely blank. No information in it whatsoever.
Really? Huh. That's weird.
Yeah, so I guess we can move on.
Yeah, no connection there.
Nope. All right, document number 4, 104-10073-10074.pdf. It's another dispatch. And this one's dated January 9th, 1963. It's from JMWAVE again.
Oh, okay, back to JMWAVE. So this dispatch, it's all about AMCUTLER 1, and it talks about how they're trying to support this AMFAUNA operation.
AMFAUNA, what was that all about?
It was basically working with anti-Castro Cuban exiles, trying to undermine the Cuban government. And the dispatch, it also talks about developing new Q-tube operations, probably something to do with spying in Cuba or gathering intel there.
Right. Okay, and it mentions interviewing 7 Cubans. Do you think that was part of those operations?
Almost certainly. They're probably vetting them, right? Trying to see if they could be informants, maybe even agents they could send back into Cuba, for infiltration. It's classic spy stuff.
Yeah, real cloak and dagger. So there's also this mention of Gonzalo Gaulin Martin and Manuel Gaulin Martin. Who were these guys?
So they were connected to the Brazilian consulate in Havana, relatives of AMCUTLER 1, actually. And the dispatch, it talks about using pouch passes through the consulate.
Pouch pass.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of a spy movie, right? But it was a way to communicate secretly, to get information in and out of Cuba without anybody noticing.
So all this anti-Castro activity happening before Kennedy was shot, how do you think it connects to the assassination?
Here's the thing. This document, it shows us that the U.S. government, they were super focused on Cuba. They were doing all this anti-Castro stuff. And we know that Lee Harvey Oswald, he was interested in Cuba too, but he was pro-Castro.
Right. Total opposite side.
Exactly. So you've got this charged atmosphere, all this intelligence work going on, and you've got Oswald right in the middle of it. I mean, this document doesn't directly connect AMCUTLER 1 or those Gaulin Martins to Oswald, but it shows us the environment. It's like it sets the stage for what happened.
Right. It gives you that context. Okay, so the next document is 104-10073-100-101.pdf. This one is dated December 9th, 1963. That's just a few weeks after the assassination. Right.
Yeah, you're right. The timing is important here. This is a secret dispatch. It's all about the debriefing of AMFAUNA 14 in the JMWAVE area. And listen to this. The debriefing happened between November 22nd and December 2nd, 1963, right after Kennedy was killed.
Wow. So what did AMFAUNA 14 know? What was the CIA so interested in?
Well, the dispatch, it describes what AMFAUNA 14 did and saw during those crucial days. Like they talk about leaving a letter, meeting 2 men, and there are some interactions with staff at a DSE headquarters.
DSE?
Yeah, that probably stands for Directorate of State Security. It's the Cuban Intelligence Agency.
Ah, okay.
So the document, it goes on to give descriptions of these 2 guys, Francisco Carlos Abad and just Carlos Abbas. Both of them had ties to Cuba.
So right after the assassination, the CIA was debriefing people who had contact with Cubans. I mean, that's got to be significant, right?
Oh, hugely. This document, it shows just how much intelligence gathering was going on after Kennedy's death. Like, they were trying to find anything, any lead, anything that might help them figure out what happened. And they were especially interested in people with Cuban connections.
I see.
And the fact that they spent so much time debriefing AMFAUNA 14, that tells you they thought she knew something important, something that might be connected to the assassination.
Okay, let's move on. The next one is 104.1073, 105.pdf, a restricted handling message dated July 7th, 1972.
Okay, so that's quite a bit later, huh?
Yeah, this one's years after the assassination, and it's about a request made to Liaison for information about MCHAO/S. It involves James H. Hoffa, Harold Gibbons, and somebody named William E. B.
Huh. Those are some big names.
Yeah. The message mentions they traveled to Vientiane, and they might have been involved with a special coverage trade union group. I don't really know what that means, but it doesn't sound very JFK related.
No, not really. I mean, Hoffa and Gibbons, they were famous, but what were they doing in Southeast Asia in 1972? It's a far cry from Dallas in 1963.
Yeah.
This document, it doesn't seem to have any direct connection to the Kennedy assassination. It does show us, though, that the CIA, they were interested in labor unions, and they were keeping tabs on certain people in Southeast Asia. And you mentioned MCHAO/S. That's interesting.
Why is that?
Because that name, it's popped up in other records. It's been connected to this idea that the CIA might have been watching Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination.
Okay.
But this specific document, it's from way later, and it's about a completely different place. So even though it mentions MCHAO/S, I don't think it tells us anything new about JFK.
All right, so next up we've got a bunch of documents that are blank. They're titled 104.10073.pdf, 104.10075, 10075, 10250.pdf. So I guess we could just skip those. Nothing to see there.
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, you always hope for some juicy secrets, right?
I know. Okay, so let's move on to document number 9. 104.10073, 10279.pdf. It's a dispatch, and it's from Tokyo. December 6th, 1967.
Okay, so this one, it forwards a memo, and it's about something called BEHEIREN. It also mentions 4 U.S. Navy deserters. And get this, the dispatch says that paragraph B, 4B of the memo, is sensitive, but we don't have that part.
Of course not. That's how it always goes.
Right, so we don't get the good stuff. But anyway, BEHEIREN, that was a big peace movement in Japan. They were active during the Vietnam War.
So again, this is years after Kennedy was killed, and it's about anti-war activities. Not exactly Dallas, 1963.
Yeah, no direct connection there. I mean, the 60s were a crazy time, lots of stuff going on, protests, movements, all that. But this particular document, it doesn't seem to tell us anything about the Kennedy assassination.
Okay, moving right along. Document 10, 104.10073, 10322.pdf. It's a dispatch, and this one comes from Tripoli, September 26th, 1970.
Tripoli. Okay, so this one, it talks about a bunch of people. It doesn't give their real names, just calls them Aiden A., Quentin V. Prochaska, and stuff like that. They were all working under a code name, GSPA/1. And the dispatch describes what they were doing in Libya, their roles, where they were located, all that.
So, 1970 Libya, another document that seems pretty far from the assassination, both in terms of time and place.
Yeah, it's true. It does show us, though, how the CIA was operating all over the world. They were involved in a lot of different things. But in terms of the Kennedy assassination, I don't think this document adds anything new to the story.
Right. Okay, next up are 2 more blank documents. 104.10073, 10350.pdf, and 104.10073, 10363.pdf. After that, we've got document 13, 104.10074, 10006.pdf. It's a secret message. Dated September 22nd, 1970.
Okay, so this message, it gives us a list of names. They're all on something called the NEAT watch list. And it tells people, whoever's reading it, to report anything they know about these folks, like if they're traveling, what they're up to, anything that might be a security risk. Especially during a European trip, it says.
So it sounds like typical security stuff, keeping an eye on potential threats, and it's from 1970.
Exactly. Routine intelligence work. It doesn't seem to be connected to the Kennedy assassination in any way.
All right. Document 14, 104.10074, 1007.pdf. It's a memorandum. And this one's a lot older. May 15th, 1947.
1947. Wow. Okay, so this one's about a guy named William Zebulon Foster, and it talks about the French Communist Party, what they were up to. It even mentions a meeting of their political bureau.
1947, that's way before Kennedy was even president. It's like early Cold War stuff.
Yeah, it is. This document, it's really interesting for historical context. You know, it shows what the U.S. intelligence agencies were worried about back then, but it doesn't have anything to do with the Kennedy assassination.
Okay, we've got two more blank documents, 104-10074, 100066.pdf, and 104-10074, 100066.pdf. Then we've got document 17, 104-10074, 1090.pdf. It's a memorandum for the record dated March 13th, 1974.
All right, let's see. This memo, it talks about a guy named Stephen Van Cleve, and it says that the FBI wanted to interview him. Oh, and there's this mention of a congressional inquiry. They were looking into Van Cleve's work with a CIA proprietary.
CIA proprietary?
Yeah, that's basically a company that the CIA owns and controls secretly. They use it for, covert ops.
Oh, okay.
So it's all hush-hush.
And then document 18, 104-100074, 1095.pdf. It's an outgoing message. February 26, 1974. It's about Stephen Van Cleve again. This time he's in Argentina.
Yeah, this message, it says that the Domestic Contact Division, they interviewed Van Cleve, and he told them that he had worked for the CIA proprietary undercover. He was pretending to work for Coca-Cola. Can you believe that?
Sounds like something out of a movie.
Right. And the memo says that the CIA, they denied wanting to use Van Cleve for anything.
So both of these documents, they're from 1974, and they're focused on this one guy, Stephen Van Cleve, and his supposed CIA connections. Doesn't seem like there's any link to the assassination.
No, not really. It's more about what the CIA was doing later on, down in Latin America. It's interesting, but not directly related to JFK.
Okay, so now we have documents 19 and 20. They're both memorandums for J.D. Lavery, both dated April 7th, 1977.
Okay, so these memos, they're talking about classifying documents. They mention something called EGS 3600. And get this, they bring up Operation MCHAO/S again.
MCHAO/S. Now, that's come up a few times before. It's supposed to have something to do with the Kennedy assassination, right?
Right, and that's what's so interesting about these documents. They might not be about the assassination directly, but the fact that they mention MCHAO/S, that tells us something.
What do you mean?
Well, these memos, they're from 1977, but they're talking about classifying documents related to this operation that might have involved Lee Harvey Oswald. So it kind of connects these later documents to the earlier period. It's like a little thread.
Yeah, like a breadcrumb trail leading back to the assassination.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next document, 104-1074, 10355.pdf. It's a CI/OZO summary dated March 1st, 1972. What does CI/O mean?
Oh, that's counterintelligence/special operations. It's like the spy versus spy stuff.
Ah, got it.
So this summary, it talks about the CIA making contact with somebody called M. 7. It happened in New York City and Virginia in February 1972. The summary goes into details about meetings, security conditions, and operations connected to a bunch of different groups. One of them was the United States-China Friendship Association.
Okay, so this document, it's from the early 70s, and it's all about counterintelligence, relations with China and other organizations. Again, no direct connection to the Kennedy assassination.
No, not this time.
All right, on to document 22, 104-104-074, 10403.pdf, and a restricted handling message, September 4th, 1970.
Okay, so this message, it reports that some El Nergo source told the CIA about a group of Arab students in Illinois. Apparently, a guy named Ishmael Flory had asked them to go on a tour of the Middle East. And the message, it mentions a group leaving Chicago on Olympic Airlines. They even list some names: Thomas Curtis, James Dillard, Kristen Johnson, Joe Walker, and some others.
So it seems like they were monitoring student travel in 1970, keeping tabs on activities within the U.S. Again, no clear connection to the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah, this one doesn't seem related.
Okay, document 23, 104-10074, 10413.tdf. It's an operational and source-covered sheet and field information report dated December 16th, 1960.
1960. So this one's from before the assassination.
Yeah, it is. And it's about an operation codenamed LJPFAT. It focuses on a guy named Jose Xavier Cortez Hernandez in Cuba. The field information report, it says that the information came from a source with good connections in the Cuban embassy. It talks about how Cortez was anti-American and had connections to the Catholic Church in Cuba.
Interesting. So even before Kennedy was assassinated, the U.S. intelligence agencies were keeping an eye on people in Cuba, especially those who were, critical of the U.S. It's another piece of the puzzle, right? It shows us what they were worried about back then.
Exactly. But this particular document, it doesn't directly link to Oswald or the assassination.
That's true.
Okay, so we've got one more blank document, 104, 100075, 100042.pdf. And then we get to some documents that are much closer to the assassination. Document 25, 104, 100075, 100099.pdf is a secret telegram. It's dated November 27th, 1963. That's just a few days after President Kennedy was shot. This one seems like it could be really important.
Yeah, this one is interesting. It reports a sighting of twin cannons. It says they were seen around Havana, Cuba, on November 23rd, 1963. That's the day after the assassination. And the information came from this educated Cuban source. They lived in Havana and had provided good military information before. The telegram also says that about 200 tanks were seen doing maneuvers, and they mention a bunch of armored vehicles called lanza-llamas. That means flamethrowers in Spanish.
So unusual military activity in Cuba right after the president was assassinated. I mean, the U.S. and Cuba were practically enemies back then, and we know Oswald was a Castro supporter. This has to raise some red flags, right?
Oh, definitely. The telegram doesn't explicitly mention the assassination, but the timing,
That's
the unusual military movements in Cuba right after Kennedy's death, it's suspicious. It makes you wonder if Cuba was involved somehow. Or maybe it was just the U.S. intelligence agencies being super cautious, gathering as much information as they could.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what was going on behind the scenes. Okay, so the next document, 104, 100075, 1020.pdf is another secret telegram. And this one is dated November 23rd, 1963, the day after the assassination.
Wow, so this telegram, it's full of intelligence updates. They need information on Diaz-List, Tito, Sandoval, Lucy, and some other Cuban personnel. And then there's this line, 20 names Mike X, good intel, hope. It's like they're speaking in code.
Yeah, very cloak and dagger. But it shows that things were moving fast right after the assassination. I mean, they were scrambling to gather information.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They were trying to figure out what happened, who was responsible. And they were looking at Cuba very closely, trying to see if there was any connection there.
Okay, document 27, 104, 100075, 10203.pdf. It's a secret priority telegram dated November 27th, 1963.
So this telegram, it's all about recruiting people. They're using code names. Oresca, Tamayo, Rolando Reyes, and so on. And the telegram emphasizes how important it is to be careful, when making contact with these folks and when recommending them for recruitment. It also says that everyone needs to be fully trained before they can be assigned to, any operations.
It sounds like they were really worried about security, which makes sense, I guess, right after the assassination.
Yeah, maybe they were reassessing their procedures, their protocols. After something so big happened, they wanted to make sure everything was by the book, no mistakes.
Yeah, they definitely didn't want to take any chances.
Right.
Okay, document 28, 104, 100075, 10225.pdf. It's another secret telegram, also from November 27th, 1963.
Okay, so this one, it provides all the specific information on people in Cuba. It lists their roles, descriptions, even family details. Names like Teodoro, Miguel Soares Hernández, Jose de Pana Carmona, all these people.
So again, it seems like they were really focused on gathering intelligence on Cuba right after the assassination.
Exactly. It's like they were trying to get a complete picture, who was there, what were they doing, anything that might be connected to the assassination.
Okay, and finally, we have two My documents that are blank, 104, 1075, 10232.pdf, and 104, 1075, 10250.pdf. So as we wrap up this deep dive into these documents, what do you think? What are the biggest connections to the JFK assassination that stand out to you?
Well, a lot of these documents, they're about the CIA's activities all over the world, different times, different places, but there are a few that really jumped out because of when they were created or because they're about people and places that are connected to the assassination.
Like which ones?
Well, that early dispatch about Carlos Bringé, the guy who had that run-in with Oswald, that's a big one. And JMWAVE, they were interested in Bringé's media contacts. That's suspicious. And then there's the dispatch about MC at REUTEMAN. It shows us how much the U.S. was focused on anti-Castro activities in Cuba just months before the assassination.
Right. It's like the pieces were already in place.
Exactly. And then, right after Kennedy was shot, you've got the AMFAUNA 14 debriefing and those telegrams about strange military activity in Cuba and all those intelligence reports on specific people in Cuba. It all points to a huge effort to uncover any Cuban connections to the assassination.
Right. Like they were trying to find the smoking gun.
Yeah, absolutely. And even those later documents, the ones about classifying stuff from Operation MCHIO/S, they remind us that Lee Harvey Oswald might have been under surveillance before the assassination.
So even though these documents come from different times and places, they paint a picture of what was happening back then. They show us the intelligence priorities, the operations. It's really fascinating.
It is. It shows how much we can learn from these primary sources, these actual documents from the time.
Exactly. So to our listeners out there, we want to leave you with a question, something to think about. How do you think these U.S. intelligence activities, the focus on Cuba, all this stuff we've talked about today, how might it have connected to the events surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy? What other questions do these documents raise? What other paths could we explore?
It's a mystery that keeps unfolding, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Until next time.